So you go from this apex experience of getting engaged and getting married, and then the wheels fall off the cart for most couples pretty quickly. Professionally, there's a very common and a similar concept. It's that after somebody gets hired, frequently their first year or two are the rockiest years. This is when there's high turnover rates. This is when there's low stick rates with teams. And if you can get past that point, then you can get momentum and develop stability inside of the organization. So for me, having a very, very clear structure of what information needs to be shared during the interview process while you're onboarding someone, and then in our work with couples, it's the interview process is the engagement. It's everything that happens prior to the marriage.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. And because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Ponto. Each week, I bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Cheri and Eric Plantenberg. Cheri graduated from the University of Washington, but earned her real education raising 6 kids, managing mayhem, and somehow keeping her sense of humor. After losing her first husband to brain cancer, she reinvented herself as a writer, psilocybin facilitator, and couples coach. Her honest, funny, and occasionally unfiltered take on wellness has been viewed more than 40 million times on Instagram, thanks in part to her now legendary alien abduction colonoscopy. Eric, on the other hand, is not very funny, but he has spent his career at the intersection of wellness and human potential. He founded a personal development company that helped tens of thousands of people transform their lives, and later founded one of the largest kombucha companies in the world. Eric summited Mount Everest and descended to a year in federal prison for tax misdemeanor, 2-week, wildly different teachers that shaped his understanding of persistence, humility, and surrender. Cheri and Eric share a love story so unlikely it sounds like a made-up, which, spoiler alert, they were prison pen pals before they ever went on a first date. Together, they are writing Those Lucky Bastards for couples who want to laugh more, argue less, and hook up like newlyweds, and co-lead the Couple Studio. Congrats on the Couple Studio, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thanks for having us, Carl.
So I'm really excited to have you both on the show. This is the first time I've had 2 guests on the show at once. But I'm really excited because there's so much about what makes a marriage work, and that is also what makes business relationships work, especially when it's between like executives or a board member and their team. So there's a lot of the same sort of skills that are often missing in the meeting rooms and in these companies at the leadership level that are what make relationships work. And so while it might seem on first glance that this is going to not a great fit, this is actually, I think, perfect because you guys are experts in the sort of skill sets that leaders need in order to connect with people on a human to human level in a way that lasts and is meaningful. So what are some of the ways you see people failing to build relationships in the business world that your sort of skill set would be exactly what the doctor ordered?
You can go.
So there's a lot here in that, Carl. I think that one of the parallels, and thanks again, by the way, for having us on the show. I do agree with you that the work that we do with couples transfers directly to organizations. And actually, a lot of the work that we do with couples was birthed from the business that Cheri owned and the business that I owned. And when we looked at our marriage and building our marriage together, we took a lot from our experiences in the professional world. Fundamentally, one of the core things that people have to wrap their head around if they're going to be growing inside of any relationship is that humans make mistakes. Everybody knows this, but when it happens, you have the ability to frame that experience as a bad thing or a good thing. One of the things that we like to say is that every single moment is either oh good or oh shit. Only every moment. So why would you choose, oh shit? Why would you watch? We had a situation recently with one of our staffers. We have a company as well. And our staffer who is new actually botched a deadline, botched a project that they had been working on for quite some time. And that moment is it's either an, oh good, we're going to learn from that moment and communicate through it. Obviously, there was a breakdown in communication, in expectations, in talent and skill level and support. Or we can let the wheels fall off the cart and then create a domino of other problems. In my businesses and I'll speak for us in a moment, in our marriage, there is not one moment that I can trace back to where we had problems, where there was something going wrong that didn't ultimately become a platform of growth. And that doesn't happen by accident. That's really easy to say on a podcast. But when you get in a practice of that, then it really changes the dynamic of when things go wrong. Is that a problem, or are we building towards the future? That's a kind of a starting point of the conversation in my mind.
Yeah, I really like that as a starting point, because I don't think that sort of environment or that mindset exists in a lot of businesses. I think there's a lot of this pressure to be perfect all the time, and not that people aren't willing to learn from it, or they don't feel safe making mistakes because they think their job's on the line, or the leaders or the executives don't have that approach. Oh, this is a mistake we can learn from and build off of. It's more, we need to punish this, we need to stamp on this, or like it's a fireable offense for any little mistakes. And so it creates this environment where people don't feel safe to try new things or to think outside the box, and it kind of tamps down on any sense of connection, because there's always this fear of reprisal for making mistakes. And then obviously that doesn't work in a relationship like a marriage. And so it doesn't make sense. It also doesn't work in an office environment.
It doesn't work when there's humans involved.
I totally agree. And I want to say one of the best days of my life was the day that I realized I didn't have to be perfect in my marriage anymore. And I'd held this ideal. I'd been married for 24 years before Eric and I got married. And so I lived a lot of marriage life. 12 years were pretty good. 12 years were kind of not good. And it was in that last 12 years where I learned so much. And I came into this relationship going, okay, I'm going to get it all right. I'm going to be, I'm not going to make mistakes. Of course, that's really hard to live up to. And so of course, things happen. We would get triggered. We called it PTSD from our former relationships, where things would come up and we were like, no, not that again. And then after just beating myself up for trying to, not have those negative emotions in my marriage, I realized I'm never going to be perfect, ever, in this marriage, to those standards of not being angry, of not getting upset, not taking things personally, even though those are things I really strive, to really be better at. But then that moment of, I don't have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. It was, do you remember that?
I do remember that.
It was so good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a feeling that is such a game changer and an aha moment, because it allows you to not only feel more comfortable as yourself and show up as yourself, and be able to open up and there's a huge weight off your shoulders, and mentally and emotionally. And then it also creates, for an office environment like that release and pressure allows you to be more focused in your work and be able to be more productive, because you're no longer running that, oh my gosh, am I perfect? Gotta be perfect script in your head, which takes up a lot of energy, and the stress keeps you distracted, and you actually aren't as good at what you're doing because you're just constantly worried about being perfect. And then you're also able to show up more as yourself, and that authenticity and that genuine humanity you're able to show people when you accept yourself as imperfect, and you know that you're not going to be looked down upon for being human, that frees you up to connect deeper and to be and reveal more of who you actually are to those around you, whether it's your partner or to coworkers or your direct reports or your managers. And that sort of connection for a business is really important, because then people start to feel like they belong there, and then they're more invested in what the business is trying to do, and they're going to be put in more effort and do better work because they're no longer fretting about being perfect and holding themselves to a standard that's not realistic. And so I think that aha moment you experienced is one that is an essential step for any sort of relationship, but often when the people have a lot of trouble making. So what are some of the things that you've seen help people get over that threshold? Because I imagine that right before they have that aha moment, there's usually a lot of fear of admitting you're not perfect or being willing to show up as not perfect. So what have you found that works for people to make that leap?
Mm-hmm. I think that this is very much parallel. We use different structure when we're working with engaged couples. By the way, almost all of our couples work, and this is very relevant to the conversation here, almost all of our couples work happens with engaged couples before they get married. Couples are going to have to do deep personal work on themselves, work with their partner, work as a union. And by waiting 2, 3, 4 years into the marriage to do this work, the most common time for couples to enter marital counseling for marital strife is year 2 or 3. And one of the most common divorce years is year 1. So you go from this apex experience of getting engaged and getting married, and then the wheels fall off the cart for most couples pretty quickly. Professionally, there's a very common and a similar concept. It's that after somebody gets hired, frequently their first year or 2 are the rockiest years. This is when there's high turnover rates. This is when there's low stick rates with teams. And if you can get past that point, then you can get momentum and develop stability inside of the organization. So for me, having a very, very clear structure of what information needs to be shared during the interview process while you're onboarding someone, and then in our work with couples, it's the interview process is the engagement. It's everything that happens prior to the marriage. So we have a blueprint that we walk couples through before they get married. It's really simple, it's really hard, and it's really good. The simplicity of it, you want to rip through it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So we set it up really well. Talking about, do you want to do it while it's easy, when you're still in love and everything's fun, or do you want to do it when it's hard? And so this is the couples that choose doing it the easier way. So the first, it's very foundational. It also, it layers on each other, but it also weaves together more like a sphere than just stacking on top, because the first element, I guess, would be values. We start with values because it's what drives everything. People's, what their behaviors follow their values. So if you're unclear about what your values are, go to your behaviors and work backwards. And then after that is trust. Marriages, coworkers, businesses all have to have that element of trust. You trust in yourself that you can bring whatever you need to bring to the relationship, to the job. Also, you trust your coworkers, you trust your partner, you trust in the process and the plan that you've set out on. And then when it's broken, then there's repair. But let's see, after trust is healthy communication. And this is so important. And the way we talk about it with our engaged couples is a little bit different than just talking about techniques, about saying sentences using I or I feel. It's way bigger than that. It goes way deeper. So healthy communication is a really important one in our process. And then alignment comes after that, where you're learning to grow together. You're learning what's important together. You're moving as a unit. It's not a transactional experience at this point, because you're really invested, and you're really cheering each other on. And same with business too. When you've got that cohesiveness, where you're not looking for the job or the other person to fill your cup, where you're bringing yourself. How can I serve? How can I create good space in the relationships or the job? And then the last one is amends and repair, which is very important. We were just talking about that.
We just don't get it right all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
In marriages and in companies, people mess up, and the ability to repair and to fix things is incredibly important. So, Carl, by starting with some sort of a framework, which is very linear and is very easy for someone to understand structurally, that gives a lot of support as to what the organization or what the marriage is going to be built on, so that you can fall back on that later. I think that when companies don't talk about their core values, what they expect from a trust standpoint, how communication works, when that isn't covered in the interview process, people are literally showing up to an environment that they have no idea how the place runs.
Yeah, the whole time she was talking, and I think it was a great. I love the framework. I was thinking this is what the people should be talking about in the interview process, and
Yes.
also the thing is, I think some people, even companies that might talk about this in some, but you mentioned don't know what your values are, look at your behaviors and work backwards. I think a lot of companies, they'll have their values on the wall, but it's not actually, they don't live them.
Right.
And so even if they are talking about it in the interview process or on their website and stuff, the actual experience that the employees are living is not what is advertised. And so that breaks the trust, and there's all kind of the whole house of cards falls over. But I can see how instead of hiring just for what's on the resume, the skill set, I think if more companies use that framework in their interview process and their hiring process, they'd have a much better team culture and overall more successful business, because they're bringing people together that are actually showing up as themselves, and they're willing to have that environment where they can make mistakes and they can grow as the company, and they're in alignment, and all these things that, if you look at the state of the job market and then business culture and issues, there's no trust. People are like the quiet quitting. There's all these issues between employees and their employers. And I think it's because the stuff you just outlined is not practiced in companies when it comes to how they hire or how they interact with their employees.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this drives people nuts when I say this, and I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm probably not going to change on this one, but I rarely hire for skill set. Rarely. Now, it's not never. And of course, when I'm hiring a chief financial officer, I'm looking for somebody that has a background in finance. I'm not hiring a painter. But at the same time, I'm much more interested in cultural fit. You can learn almost anything quickly if you put your mind to it. You can learn almost any system quickly, software, process, if you put your mind to it and if there's a culture of learning. So some of the best hires I've ever made came in exactly zero knowledge base at the job that they were going to be doing. And then 5, 7, 10 years later, they're still running the organization.
Yeah, I think because you can teach the knowledge, and often, like, if you're bringing someone in, they're going to be leading a team. Like they don't necessarily know how to do this stuff, but they know how to lead the people, and they're going to learn how things are already done. If they do it right, they're not going to come in and be like, "Hey, we're going to change all these things on my first day," without me knowing what's going on. But they're going to go in and let's build some relationships and get integrated and learn what's going on first.
Yeah.
But you can't teach the mindset, the culture, the kind of things that are the communication skills, all the things that we've been discussing when Cheri outlined the framework. You can't necessarily teach that stuff on the job. whether you can teach the knowledge or the platforms and the tools. And so the fact that so many companies hire for skills and not for culture fit, and then wonder why their teams aren't performing and people are not getting along and not working well, and there's all these toxic environments and stuff, is a no-brainer when you understand what's actually going on between the human relationships at the company.
There's something that you said that I partially agree with, but I want to call out what I don't agree with, because I think it's really important. A lot of people say that you can't teach attitude, you can't teach culture, you can't teach values. I actually really disagree with that. And here's why. It's because most people want to belong inside of a culture that has strong values, strong processes, strong ways that it does things. For example, at Hum Kombucha, we were literally 8 people that had no idea how to make kombucha at scale and sell and distribute it. Like, no idea. We'd started in my kitchen, and then I went to a farmer's market. The next thing I know, Safeway and Albertsons are calling. The next thing, Costco and Walmart are calling, and we're like scaling, and it's really changing. We went from 8 to 100 plus employees in a couple of years. Okay, one of the core things that we did right is every decision, more important than the decision that was made, is did everybody feel safe in sharing their opinion about what decision was being made? That was a priority over the actual decision that was made. And again, that drives business consultants mad, because they're like, well, you have to make good decisions. And that drives really logical operators mad. But it actually works. It doesn't mean that we made bad decisions. It means that more important than what decision was made was everybody heard and listened to, so that we can make the right decision. And in our marital work, the whole piece on alignment, couples normally go into it, as do managers, they go into it thinking, okay, alignment means that we're going to agree. Actually, that's not what it means at all. Alignment simply means that we are all supporting the decision that was actually made. It doesn't mean that we agree on what the best decision is. It means that we got to a decision. Like, lots of times we disagree. You want to go left, I want to go right. I want to stop, you want to go forward, whatever it may be. Well, in a marriage, it just doesn't work that way. You can't just not go anywhere. In a business, you have to make decisions. So it's, how do you get to support? How do I learn to relinquish my position to support hers? How does she learn to double down when it's really important to her? And how does she learn to relinquish and go my direction? This is a skill. And it's not like, oh, you have that or you don't. But if the culture doesn't support that, people will not learn the skill.
That is a great point. I love it. And I will thank you so much for connecting with me today, Cheri and Eric. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please leave a comment and subscribe. If you want to connect with myself or my 2 guests today, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.